I'm going to acknowledge the Earth Mother and the Sky Father.
I think poverty is the biggest. Our Indigenous people haven't really been shown a model for success. The check boxes are they're wayward, troubled, addiction, pregnant. And if that's not racism or discrimination, I don't know what is. TikTok, they've taken over TikTok. They have their own Indigenous TikTok, questioning my Indigenousness. They said I didn't look Indigenous enough. We have to dismantle the box. And that dismantling the box is dekolonization.
Dobar dan, dragi moji, dobrodošli u Život u Kanadi i dobrodošli u novu priču iz serijala o Starosedeocima Kanade. Danas ćete čuti i vidjeti intervju sa Metjuom Dikom, koji je potomak starosedelaca i neko ko je jako aktivan u njihovim zajednicama, radi kao edukator, bavi se rešavanjem jako mnogo važnih problema i pre svega edukacijom omladine. U priči o rezidencijalnim školama, evo i ovde za sve vas koji je možda niste videli, smo naučili nešto o istoriji starosedelaca i o tome kako su oni živeli nekada. Mene je zanimalo da sada čujemo o tome kako oni žive danas, sa kakvim se problemima susreću. Da li u ovom društvu i dalje prema njima ima diskriminacije, kako se živi u rezervatima i van njih, kakvo obrazovanje dobija njihova omladina, čemu se nadaju, kakvi su planovi za budućnost i da li je dekolonizacija već počela. Zapravo, da li se tek zahuktava ili je to borba koja traje možda već jako dugo. I ovaj video će dugo trajati, za to postoji odličan razlog. Metju je fantastičan sagovornik koji govori o jako interesantnim stvarima. Od njega može mnogo da se nauči i da se čuju neki savjeti o tome kako se izboriti ako ste pojedinac ili neka društvena zajednica koja živi u sistemu u kom se možda ne osjeća sasvim slobodno. I zbog toga ništa iz našeg intervjua nisam htela da skratim. A cela priča počinje sa jednim od najvažnijih rituala iz kulture starosedelaca. To je ritual koji se zove SMUDGING ili u slobodnom prevodu kađenje i imamo veliku čast i privilegiju da nam Metju pokaže kako on izgleda i objasni čemu služi. Znam da u Kanadi ima jako mnogo potomaka starosedelaca koji su izgubili veze sa svojim korenima i koji čak i ne znaju mnogo o smudgingu. A Metju nam je ovo pokazao upravo kako bi edukovao što više ljudi o kulturi i tradiciji starosedelaca. SMUDGING služi da umiri naš duh, da umiri i očisti naše misli i da našu dušu učini mirnom i otvorenom za sve ono što iz okoline može da vidi, čuje, pokupi kako bi kroz to rasla. I mislim da je upravo to najbolji način da započnemo ovu priču i da i mi tako otvorenog uma čujemo i prihvatimo sve ono što Metju ima da nam kaže. Krećemo!
Tensei, I'm going to show you how to smudge and why. So, what I've got here before us right now, which is smoking right now, is sage. Sage is one of the 4 sacred medicines in our indigenous teachings. So the other 3 are sweetgrass, cedar, which we see an abundance of out here on the West Coast, and then there's tobacco. Now, tobacco isn't something we would necessarily burn like this. It's more in regards to an offering we would give to an elder for a wisdom teaching, or we would essentially bury, maybe this tree has given me something, maybe I've peeled the bark off this tree. I would then make an offering of tobacco to this tree, to the Earth Mother, to the Creator, to show my gratitude. Now, a little side note about tobacco and offering it to an elder. When we give a tobacco bundle, sometimes it is usually wrapped in a little red cloth. If I approach an elder, I would put it in my left hand because it's the closest to my heart. And I would extend my arm to the elder, not looking them in the eye. And if that elder decides to take that offering, they are now contractually obligated to help me with whatever my dilemma is, or they don't have to take it at all. So just remember that. Always courtesy, protocol, protocol, protocol. So why do we smudge? Well, in a very simple answer, it's to clear the air of negativity. Now, we could remove the negativity from a particular area, but I think the most important step before you enter into the area is to clear the negativity from yourself. For a lot of people, people think that smudging is mystical. Some people think it's a pagan practice and it's this and it's that and the other thing. In fact, smudging has been around in many cultures for thousands and thousands of years. What people don't realize is that people back in the old days realized that there were medicinal properties to the sage itself, that they could actually clear bacteria and things from the air. This has actually been scientifically based. It's burned for a lot of different reasons, and the reason that we're using it is because it does have those medicinal purposes. So when we say medicinal or medicine, it's something that's good not only for our bodies and our minds, but it's good for our spirit. And for us as Indigenous people, we're very spiritual people. We want to make sure that we are of right mind and heart before we connect with the earth or our Creator. So what do? The first thing I'm going to do is I want to take some of this smoke and I want to cleanse and wash my hands. And then I'm going to cup it, bring it up over my head, to my ears, to my eyes, to my mouth, and to my heart. So, in a nutshell, I want to be mindful of what I think, what I hear, what I see, what I say, and what I feel in my heart. Most of us, and I mean most of us, I mean all of us, are not aware of what's going on a day-to-day basis. We're not really paying attention to what we say or what other people are saying to us because we're not really listening. We're not really disputing our irrational thoughts. And this leads us into some severe problems. Could be depression, could be panic attacks, could be a whole lot of things. So what this ceremony teaches us is that we need to be much more aware. We need to be more present about everything that's going on in our lives, right? And we've got these 5 senses going off here. And if we aren't really paying attention to one of them, we're going to have a problem. That is what happens in the first portion. Now let's have a looky-loo at what it looks like to do a greater ceremony. So what I'm going to do, I'm facing east right now. So the first thing I want to do before I start this ceremony is I want to make sure that my head and my heart are in the right place before I try to connect with the Creator and the Earth Mother, because it's a matter of respect, and I want to make sure that I have a good connection. So the first thing I have to do is I'm just going to close my eyes, and while I'm doing this, I'm just going through a series of checks, just like I did when we just started there. I'm going through my thoughts, any mental images that I have, any sounds I'm trying to become aware of, even my own internal voice. What is it saying? Can I make it quieter? And what am I feeling right now? Do I have good intentions? Am I in a right place? As soon as I start to feel connected, I'll begin. So the first thing I'm going to do, of course, I will fan with my eagle feather, which is a representation of our eagle. The eagle is kind of the conduit between the earth and the Creator. And for some people who believe in angels, eagles are kind of like angels. They help carry our messages and our prayers up to the Creator. So this is what this represents. As well, it's the element of air. So what I'm going to do, I will start, you can see the tip, and I'm going to make a big circle, draw a line, and another line. So what I've just created is a medicine wheel. I'm going to step forward, I'm going to project forward, I'm going to banish the negativity from this area. I'm going to acknowledge the Earth Mother and the Sky Father. turn. And I'll repeat. Making sure that I honor each of the 4 directions. While I'm doing that, I'm banishing that energy and I'm invoking the spirits and the ancestors from these 4 directions. Now I'm back here where I began. Now, at this particular moment, I could just finish. I could be done. I could contemplate. I could pray. It's really just up to you how you're feeling or the work that you're trying to achieve. Now, there's a lot that I've just shown you in this particular ceremony that is personal unto me, and it mightn't be right for me to share it in this particular format. I want to make it accessible so people can understand what these teachings are. And the reason why this ceremony looks the way it does was my ability to retain the medicine wheel teachings that I've taught. So what I've just shown you helps me remember the teachings and make sure that I'm always putting them into practice each and every day. And this is something that I will pass on to my children and hopefully continue down the generational lines. But that's pretty much it. There's no harm in you doing this, and just do it respectfully. Go with good intentions. You know, you probably don't want to use the sage that you cook with because it smells like burnt garbage. This is always pretty accessible. I highly recommend you do it. Find something you're not going to burn your hand or it's going to catch on fire, and find some balance in your own life. I hope that helped.
Bilo je i od koristi i lekovito. I nakon rituala koji nam je otvorio prelazimo u kancelariju neprofitne organizacije za koju Metju radi kao koordinator programa za starosedeoce. Njegov posao nije samo kancelarijski. Svakodnevno odlazi na teren, obilazi zajednicu starosedelaca koja živi u ovom delu grada i pomaže im u svakom smislu. Od nošenja paketa pomoći onima koji su ugroženi do upućivanja na različite servise i programe podrške. On sam kreator je programa za razvoj različitih veština kod omladine. Zanimalo me je šta smatra najtežim delom svog posla.
It can be really stressful. Sometimes our communities are, there's a lot of disparities in our communities. And so it can be really hard. It's really hard to separate yourself as a human being when you go into an environment and you're trying to help somebody and you see what they're going through, and then you've got to go home to your own family, you've got to shake that off. That's the hardest thing, because if you have a heart and you care, it's really difficult. And sometimes during the course of a day, I could have anywhere from 0 to like 5 or 6 cases that could be incredibly challenging, and especially during our times right now with the events that are in our news, it's been daily.
Šta je danas najveći izazov za ljude koji žive u zajednicama starosedelaca?
I think poverty is the biggest. Poverty, unfortunately, is kind of a link to so many other disparities, and our indigenous people haven't really been shown a model for success. How to create wealth, how do we generate wealth? Because we're constantly being bombarded with what we're doing wrong and reopening wounds that are never going to close because they're not allowed to. So that's one of the big ones. And then of course you take that and you put that through the lens of trauma and intergenerational trauma, and trauma manifests in so many different ways that it creates so many micro nuances. They're kind of like barriers that are there predominantly in our minds, because that's where trauma lives, and it lives in our bodies and everything else. But it wouldn't matter. Somebody could be doing incredibly good, they could be super motivated, and then something comes along, it triggers them, and that's it. So until we have, I think, found a way to generate and stabilize our financial situation and confront our trauma, I don't think things are going to change within our communities.
Kako misliš da je to moguće izvesti?
There's a couple of things that we have to look at. A, within our own community, within our own country, we have to reassess how we are treating Indigenous people. And I don't think anyone would disagree with that. We have to find ways to support Indigenous entrepreneurs, professionals, artists, make sure that we celebrate them, make sure they get the exposure that they need so that they can grow wealth and they can now be models for their communities. And we need to educate our people and say, this is what this individual has done, this is what they have done well, and you can do it too. And we take that information, we make it accessible. The other thing is that we have to, as Indigenous people, have to challenge our thinking about the past. And we have to confront it. And if we don't confront it, there is no future.
Misliš li da ljudi imaju kapacitete za to?
I think everyone has capacity. Again, we often don't think we do. And that's the operative word, is think. Is our thinking is our limit. And no one's shown us that we can think beyond where we are now. If you're constantly being put in a box and they're saying, this is your box, why would you ever think there was anything outside of that box? So we have to dismantle the box. And that dismantling the box is decolonization.
O dekolonizaciji se dugo pričalo na marginama društva. U poslednje vreme se priča sve glasnije, pa ipak čini se da će to biti vrlo dugačak put. Nisam sigurna da li grešim ako kažem da je borba za dekolonizaciju još prilično nevidljiva za oči šire javnosti.
No, you're not wrong. You're not wrong at all. I think what has happened, just based on the system that started so long ago with residential schools, it's still in place, but it has changed just on the basis of optics, right? The society is different. Society is supposed to be nicer, gentler. The gentler settler. I don't know why I thought of that, but it's just changed. I mean, right now there are more children in foster care, Indigenous children in foster care, than there ever was in residential school. And so it's a completely different way of doing it, but children get pulled from their homes for very, very minute reasons. And it's an industry. People who take in foster children make money. There's money from the government. And unfortunately, there are some children that truly do need to be in a place that's safer, maybe better, because there are some challenges at home. And, they get put in some really great foster care. But then there's also people out there that are exploiting these children, and they're prospering off of it. And we're aware of it, and there's not much that we can really seem to do about it. There's also challenges that are currently still happening in regards to Indigenous women, especially with our missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That's still not really being fully addressed. We've done some inquiries, but then why is it still happening? What's the answer? Is it still a systemic system of racism? I don't know. I don't have that answer. In regards to our Indigenous women, I only learned this a couple of years ago, and I was shocked. But Indigenous women being forced to be sterilized when going in to receive medical treatment, especially if they're about to have a baby. I was shocked, and it's happening right now in our communities.
O tome sam nedavno čula i čitala i ja. I kao i uvek kada vidimo ovako šokantne vesti, vidimo i komentare ljudi koji se pitaju ima li dokaza za to.
Sure, if a person were to just kind of inquire, but I don't think they would give that documentation. So we've had clients who were very severely traumatized, where in their sharing of their stories, saying that they went in, baby is ready to come, they are now hemorrhaging, and they're being told they need to sign off on a document or they'll be refused service. There's documented cases throughout Canada where we've had individuals who have come to their own demise because they were refused service. So, and those cases are in the paper, you can look those cases up. So the system's still in place. And again, when you look at working in the non-for-profit business, it seems to be there's more funding that's available for support of the narrative of the broken Indigenous person, which is so very frustrating. So case in point, so what's a good example? So there's a lot of funding that's available for Indigenous youth, provided the checkboxes are they're wayward, troubled, addiction, pregnant. What does that do? There's not a program like, hey, junior business entrepreneurs, right? There's nothing like that. Maybe there is now, but even at that, it would probably be hard for me to get funding for something like that. And there's still this idea that the Indigenous people still can't quite get themselves together. And if that's not racism or discrimination, I don't know what is.
Kako bi ti opisao vašu omladinu? Koje bi reči upotrebio?
What I would say, our Indigenous youth are innovative. They're transcending. They're so resilient. They're inspirational. I see what our Indigenous youth are doing, like just TikTok. They've taken over TikTok. They have their own Indigenous TikTok. I have only started exploring TikTok, and I cannot believe what they're doing, how they are telling stories. They're using this new medium to share stories, to talk about their lives, talk about their culture. They're proud of their culture. And that's so exciting because they're breaking the generational curse. They've made a point of saying, this is where it ends. We're moving forward. We are going to take our culture, we're going to celebrate it, and we're going to allow it to evolve. We're going to allow it to come into the contemporary age, and just seeing what they're doing with music and art, and just using these platforms that they have right now. It's amazing, and we need to be talking more about it, but for whatever reason they aren't getting that in the mainstream media. But when you look at some of the superstars, I mean, they've got millions of followers, millions, and why isn't anybody talking about it?
Vancouver ima čime da se ponosi u ovom smislu. Vrlo progresivna kulturna politika koju su kreirali gradski čelnici za kulturu predviđa tesnu saradnju grada sa prvim nacijama i njihovo prisustvo u svim oblastima koje se tiču kulture i umetnosti, a to podrazumeva promociju tradicije starosedelaca i njihovih umetnika. Metju sa ovom strategijom, međutim, nije upoznat.
There's always that I'll believe it when I see it. I hear a lot of lip service when it comes to, like, case in point, like a Black Lives Matter. How that was a big thing and everybody was rah, rah, rah. And now it's kind of silent, isn't it? Where are all these programs? Same thing with you look at BIPOC communities, look at our LGBTQ communities. All of these things that everybody rallies behind because it's good for business, right? We all want to be not canceled, but where is everybody now? Where are they? There's a lot that has to be done. There's a lot that has to be done, and it is not going to happen overnight. We have there's a saying within Indigenous communities that it was going to take 7 generations. And I don't know where we are on that scale. I don't know if we're close. I think this generation right now, this youth, if anyone was going to change the future, I think it's them. They're going to be the ones planting the seeds. Absolutely. It's because they're not looking for anyone else to change it for them. And that's what we need. We need that autonomy. We always had autonomy, but then we became kind of brainwashed to think that we needed this government, or we needed this and we needed that. And so now we've been domesticated to kind of push the feeder bar. This is how we get this is how we get that. And it creates a lot of mistrust, a lot of animosity within the non-Indigenous communities, because there's a stereotype and belief that Indigenous people get all of this stuff for free, which isn't true. This is money that was held in perpetuity from these original treaties. People think it comes from their tax dollars. It does not.
Odakle dolazi taj novac?
It is money that has been held on. I imagine it comes from tax dollars now because part of the government's probably spent that money. That's my opinion, but it was monies based on the fact that these treaties were about our lands, our mineral rights, everything. This is long time. Like, we're talking probably trillions of dollars. But again, people always think some other group's getting more than them. Even I have people that I've grown up around. Well, so I guess your kid's school is all paid for. No. My kids had to get 2 assessments for autism. I paid out of pocket for them. Like that's $1,500 per thing. I don't get any benefits or support other than my work benefits that I work for, I pay into. You get a free vehicle. So some people get new pickup trucks every year because that's all Indigenous people care about are pickup trucks. Not entirely true. Free dental, free this, free that. It's not true. If it was true, then why is there so much poverty? Why is there so many disparities? It doesn't make any sense. But people want to believe that that's the case. I think non-Indigenous people have to come to terms with the reality and the history of Canada. It's not just Indigenous people, right? What we did to other groups, Chinese head tax, especially here where we are in Vancouver, crazy. You don't even begin. So my children are half Chinese. And so that's another education that I'm trying to encourage them to understand. What we did with our Japanese communities, what we did with our East Indian communities. There's probably not a community that was not marginalized and discriminated against in Canada. And yet we're like, yeah, one of the greatest countries in the world. Don't get me wrong, I mean, it's a lot better than a lot of places, but we also have this underlining culture of discrimination that's kind of rampant. And people will always say, well, that's not the case. But you just have to be present anywhere you go, and you'll see it. You know, you'll hear somebody yell at somebody, you'll tell somebody to go back to where they came from. You're like, what are you talking about? This person was born here.
Da bi se ovakva percepcija promenila, potrebno je edukovati ljude. Za to će biti potrebno mnogo vremena, ali pre svega volje onih koji bi morali da budu otvorenog uma, da čuju različite iskustva i činjenice i o istoriji i trenutnim statusima prvih nacija. Još je mnogo onih koji to ne žele da čuju, da znaju, ali i onih koji ne veruju da je životni standard starosedelaca toliko loš. To stanje oslikava se i u velikom broju medija.
We have a saying over here, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So unless you chase in the ambulance or whatever, it's not news. And that's unfortunate. It's these stories that lead are always, you know, something bad. Never, you know, look at Susan's company that she started from scratch. She's now making Bannock billionaire, you know. We don't hear about that. And it's so very, very frustrating, especially right now. You would think that people would really wake up to really being more supportive and inclusive of Indigenous people. Like LinkedIn, it drives me crazy. Like people are constantly asking, what can we do to support? What could we do? What can we do? We'll start supporting Indigenous businesses. It's not that hard to do. It doesn't cost you anything. Just do it. Have a conversation. Look for conversations with Indigenous people. See what they need. Don't speak on their behalf. Listen. You know, become trauma-informed yourself. I think that would be probably one of the greatest things that happens throughout this whole country. Because if you're trauma-informed, you'll have a better understanding of everybody. You'll realize that somebody's feeling triggered. Maybe you'll have a better approach. Maybe you'll be more empathetic. Maybe you'll understand yourself. And that goes a long way. And I think if we can all start at that baseline, maybe we can have that commonality of mutual respect in this country. My people, you know, all my relations, we're all connected. It doesn't matter. You know, the medicine wheel has 4 different colors, and those describe the 4 different colors of people, and they meld in those colors. And we often forget that. We're so fixated on trying to find out what's different. And if you look hard enough, you always find something different. You'll always find something you're not going to like. But we just got to stop that. We got to start looking at what connects us. How are we the same? Right? We all go to the washroom. I hope, right? But you know what I'm saying? We all do. It's human. We all eat. We all sleep. We all have dreams, aspirations.
And traumas.
And traumas, exactly. And shared traumas. Shared traumas.
Mnogo je predrasuda, a malo znanja o tome da među starosedeocima ima uspešnih političara, advokata, lekara, profesora, poslovnih ljudi i mene je zanimalo imaju li oni iste uslove za obrazovanje i napredak, živeli u rezervatima ili van njih.
It just depends on the person, personally. That's what it always comes down to. You know, reserves are all different. There are some that are done incredibly well, and they've got good leadership. Tuasin Band, amazing. What have they done out there? They've developed and they've created a mall, and they think their next thing is a great big entertainment district that they're putting out there. So they've found ways to live within this world, retain their culture, and prosper. That's amazing. And they've got their own, I believe they have their own school district. They have everything out there. So they've found a way to be in this world, but retain their indigeneity, which is amazing. Personally, I know so many amazing young Indigenous people who have come from such diverse backgrounds, reserve, urban Indigenous like myself, and they've done what they needed to do to succeed just by working hard, being disciplined, not allowing themselves to go down a road. And it could happen with any youth or anybody at any time. They just saw something bigger, and somebody in their life was there to also believe in them, to help keep them on that path. So there are some amazing traditional families that retain culture, still do ceremony. So that's a big part of it. And you know, it always comes back to home, comes back to the parents. And unfortunately, even our culture with what cultural genocide did and how it destroyed the family, and somehow these youth have found something inside themselves to say, I'm not going to let this define me.
Tu snagu je vrlo teško pronaći. Neki su, poput Metjua, odrastali ne identifikujući sebe sa svojom kulturom. Drugi su, odrastajući u toj kulturi, trpeli diskriminaciju. Treći su, ponajviše oni koji su bili žrtve smeštanja u hraniteljske porodice poslednjih decenija, potpuno izgubili veze sa korenima. Svima njima zajednički je osjećaj nedovoljne vrednosti.
I don't think there's an Indigenous person, especially who didn't grow up a culture, who doesn't feel at some point like an imposter. And that again is, you know, a side effect of trauma. There was a fellow that I got to be a part of his lectures and talks, and this fellow by the name of Brad Marsden. Brad started his talks based on an idea when he heard Truth and Reconciliation. He's like, what is this? So he decided to create a PowerPoint presentation, and he goes, I'm gonna go and give talks. And now he is this guy who went from this really not so good talk to now probably one of the most in-demand speakers. And I met Brad at a education conference, a Pro D Day, and we got along very, very well. And I got to know him, and he was very encouraging to me because he knew that I was kind of struggling with my Indigenous identity. And he says, you know, I'd love for you to come out and tell a story at my next lecture. And I was like, oh, and I don't think I want to do that. No, you gotta come. And I'm like, well, where is it? It's at this Indigenous Friendship Center. I'm like, there's gonna be real Indigenous people there? And he's like, yeah, man, you gotta come. And he goes, this is the topic. I want you to share a story. You got a good Cree story about this. And I'm like, okay. So I showed up and I tried to dress like Brad. I had to wear a black dress t-shirt, and he's a very, very handsome, very traditional looking Indigenous man. And I'm there not looking what I feel is very Indigenous. And there's all of these card-carrying, authentic-looking Indigenous people there. I open with my story. I tell this story about the moon, the origins of the moon. And I rehearsed the story, and I told it as dramatically as I possibly could. And there was no feedback. And I thought, oh my God, they hate me. They see right through me. This is horrible. And then Brad gives his spectacular talk, totally flawless. And I'm like, oh, why can't I be like him? We finished the talk, and I can't wait to get out of there. I'm sweating, and they're like, oh, you know, Matthew, we'd love to honor you. And I'm like, no, it's fine. You don't need to honor me with anything. And I was given my first eagle feather. And it's such a huge honor. Afterwards, all of these people came up to me and either hugged me or shook my hand. But they all thanked me because they'd never heard that story. And in my mind, oh, they're Indigenous people. They probably know this story. They probably heard it 1,000 times. And that's when the realization hit me. This is what colonization did. This is the cultural genocide. So they were no more Indigenous in their minds as I was. And I realized how precious culture is. We need to savor it. We need to share it because it's so hard to come by, to have somebody give you something. It's like smudging. When I received the teachings for smudging, it was like this light went on. I was like, oh, I can't believe it. It was like magic. Oh my goodness. When I received the medicine wheel teachings, another like, you know, And I began to feel more and more comfortable wearing this indigenous identity. You know, culture's a privilege. It'd be like growing up somewhere where you celebrate Christmas, and then some regime comes in and says, no more. You're all going to worship this loaf of bread, right? And that's it. And that'd be pretty tough for a lot of people, especially if you don't eat bread, right? You don't want any, but that's all you get to eat is eat bread every day, and you got to worship the bread, and it's white bread. People don't get it. But it's like, I think during COVID, especially during the pandemic, considering we had a lot of rights and freedoms taken away, and all these people were whining and complaining because they couldn't go out and drink in a bar, I'm like, cry me a river. Get over it. This is nothing. This is nothing.
Za mene je bilo iznenađenje da čujem da se Metju borio sa svojim identitetom I poreklom.
It was a lot of discrimination. I had people within our non-indigenous community questioning my indigenousness. They said I didn't look indigenous enough. They said because I had a beard, I looked like a colonizer. It was so hurtful. I didn't grow up really knowing about our indigenousness because my mom was afraid of sharing that on the basis of my brother is half Chinese. We grew up in a very predominantly white European community. My brother was called a lot of racial slurs. My mom didn't feel that it would be wise for us to come out of the closet with our indigenousness. And the other thing we have to understand is that my grandfather was a residential school survivor. So my mom and her siblings really didn't grow up knowing much about culture because unfortunately my grandfather's legacy was very traumatic, lots of violence. And that's what I experienced growing up as well. So when I connected the dots and I found out through my mom, then I started exploring it, and it was strange because I grew up predominantly, I felt very Caucasian, very, you know, did Christmas, we did all the same things. But then in hindsight, when I go back and I think about it, we grew up very indigenous. We grew all of our own food. We're always outside. Everything was outside. My mom knew so much about things that I didn't know how she knew them. Like, we always knew how to read the weather. We understood the clouds, we understood the soil, we understood all these different things. So it was always there. You know, my Auntie Diane used to like take my brother and I camping, and she'd tell us all these crazy stories. But these were stories that were told to her, and these were actual traditional stories. So Wasaki Jack is a trickster from our Cree, ancestral teachings, and he's kind of an interesting character. And I always thought it was Whiskey Jack. So that, in my mind, I thought, you know, Auntie she was out there. But in fact, she was sharing these stories with us. Yeah, I think it's tough. I think for anybody, when you try something new or you're stepping into something, it doesn't feel right. And it feels worse when other people are not buying it and questioning it.
Znači, zapravo si I ti morao da učiš.
Yeah, I've had to learn. And by no means, like, I don't go parading around trying to look extra indigenous. This little bracelet, which is it's a raven band. The reason why these were made is because they outlawed tattooing in the certain cultures. So they started creating this jewelry. So this was like the first real indigenous thing I ever had. And it was just, I wanted something just kind of of a nod, like, you know, I'm with you, brother, you know, that kind of thing. And then as things kind of, you know, progressed and I became more comfortable, I'm able to wear a shirt like this, or, you know, wear regalia and feel more comfortable in it. And it's a hard thing for me to explain. I mean, you look at any culture, like I'm sure like every culture has its traditions, and all of a sudden somebody's like, hey, you know, put this outfit on, this traditional dancing garb. You're like, I'll never wear that. But now you're wearing it, or these traditional songs. I don't know what it is, but even though we didn't have original contact maybe with it in the beginning, somewhere in our DNA, it's like we were always wearing it in the first place.
Majica koju Metju nosi omaž je nestalim devojkama I ženama iz plemena starosedelaca. To je kriza koja traje jako dugo. Regalija koju pominje je deo njihove tradicionalne odeće. Narukvicom je želeo da pokaže da je među svojima, što ne bi važilo za bilo koga od nas ko ne deli njihovo poreklo. Svedoci smo, međutim, masovnog preuzimanja simbola iz tradicije raznih plemena, u različite, pa i komercijalne svrhe. Za ljude kojima je generacijama bilo zakonom zabranjeno da svoju kulturu praktikuju i obeležavaju, to je posebno bolno. Kulturna aproprijacija ili prisvajanje kulture je termin kojim se u poslednje vreme neki aktivisti iz redova starosedelaca bore protiv toga.
I really don't like the term cultural appropriation. I don't like it. One of my artist friends and I, we really like the term cultural appreciation. We want people to appreciate culture, of any culture. Why can't we, right? Because if we can't, then we better stop doing a lot of the things that we enjoy. All you yoga people out there, right? When we look at cultural appropriation, it would be every time we see a model or an actor or actress wearing a headdress, that's not cool because it's ceremonial. But if you were to support an artist and buy this piece of jewelry and wear it, that is an appropriation. You supported an artist. That artist isn't going to turn away you wanting to purchase that. But if you wanted to take this and duplicate it and sell it as your own, that would be appropriation. That's kind of the line, you know. But again, it's hard to say. Like, I've done martial arts for almost 30 years. Should I be?
Šta ako bih ja želela da pronađem životinju koja oslikava moj duh?
You could go to a New Age shop and find that. There's a lot of misconceptions in Western culture about a lot of things, like the indigenous zodiac and things. There are people that maybe dispute me and say, well, this is true. And then there's other people that say it's total garbage, it's not true. If you wanted to find your animal spirit, I think you just need to go for a walk in nature. You know, your animal spirit will find you. That's the thing. We're always looking, and everything that we're looking for is generally right in front of us. It's just we're so unaware. So I think if you're looking for your animal spirit, it will definitely just come up and bonk you on the head. It's there, you know, it's always going to be there. Everybody's looking for the magic indigenous experience. That's it's kind of movie stuff. Not to say that our people are immensely spiritual, very in touch with the supernatural. But again, it's what exactly are we trying to describe? Like any culture, are these just real deep psychological experiences that we're trying to explain through whatever means or terms that we have? I don't know. Are they real experiences that people are having? They may very well be. I've had experiences I can't explain. I know they didn't happen in my head. But I think that if you're wanting to seek an authentic indigenous experience, you've really got to become honest with yourself and ask yourself why. What's missing in your life? What's in your own culture and history that might fulfill what it is you're looking for? You know, why try to be something or someone else? There's lots that you could learn from our indigenous ancestry and our culture, but you have to ask yourself why. I love hip hop culture. I grew up listening to hip hop. I love it. I break danced. I did all of that. I loved it. But then the people go to that extra kind of step where they try to emulate being of color. And well, that's like what's happening? It seems so strange to me. Where other cultures, like our indigenous communities, have totally embraced hip hop, but they're still indigenous. So I don't know. It's a very strange phenomena where people are so ashamed of who they are. I think there's a lot more going on than needing to, you know, have the spiritual journey. I don't know.
Kada smo naučili sa čime se svakodnevno bore i koliko je snage potrebno da bi se izašlo iz nametnutih okvira jednog sistema, pitala sam Metjua šta smatra najvažnijim učenjima koje bi trebalo preneti na njihovu omladinu i nove generacije.
To think and to understand that they're in control of their thoughts and emotions, and those are the core building blocks of resilience. So if we can get children back to a land-based curriculum in any capacity, children instinctively, like anybody, become much more aware, much more present. They're no longer distracted by all our electronic gizmos, our electronic pacifiers, as I like to call them. It's just that when we allow ourselves to be overtaken by nature, our nature becomes natural. And when we're natural, there's that neuroplasticity in the brain. It becomes receptive to new information, to wisdom. There might be wisdom staring us right in the face. We might be looking at a tree and we begin to see a pattern. We might see something that starts to question something else within inside of us. And maybe during that time of contemplation, we can connect with that voice within ourselves, that higher teaching, and then we'll have insights. And those insights lead to inspiration, they lead to art, they lead to, progress. And that is something that we want for children. We want children to learn how to think for themselves, how to think outside of that box that I had mentioned, and that they have way more power and control. Children feel very powerless. So imagine now a whole generation of children who grew up feeling powerless, and they've grown into being adults. And we know about traumas, that trauma tends to freeze people at that particular age. So now you get somebody who's 40 who may be stuck at 13. And that 13-year-old mentality is trying to raise a 13-year-old. It doesn't work. You can't have a 13-year-old mentor a 13-year-old. My hope is in the programs that we're trying to build and to, of course, seek and find other programs like that, is where children find that innateness in themselves, that they can achieve what they need to, that they can survive, that they can just be who they need to be in the moment and be okay with it.
Zvuči tako jednostavno, ali ta lekcija o tome kako biti prisutan u momentu življenja i osjećati se dobro zbog onoga što jesi je možda jedna od najtežih lekcija za sve nas i istovremeno najvrednijih. I to bi bilo to. Hvala vam što ste pogledali ceo ovaj video. Sigurna sam da ste jako mnogo toga dobrog naučili. Ako vam se ova priča svidela, lajkujte video, podelite ga sa prijateljima i napišite mi u komentarima šta je možda za vas bilo iznenađenje ili neka pouka iz svega ovoga što ste čuli danas. Najlepša vam hvala na pažnji, ostanite mi dobro i vidimo se uskoro.